Have you ever found yourself in a relationship, a dating experience, or even just drawn to somebody who seems very distant, hard to read, a little bit aloof, or even emotionally unavailable? Despite that aloof and sometimes confusing exterior, there's something very specific that individuals who are emotionally unavailable tend to be seeking when it comes to connection and when it comes to love. So, in this video, we're going to dive more deeply into the hidden desires of an emotionally unavailable person and reveal what truly tends to win them over. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how to assess if this is a healthy relationship for you to be investing in and key signs to look for in case it might not be. So here's a question I get all the time, and it's, do emotionally unavailable people crave intimacy? Or in other words, does the dismissive avoidant attachment style crave intimacy? Now, if you're not already familiar with attachment styles, we all have one. And the dismissive avoidant attachment style tends to be the most emotionally unavailable person when it comes to love. And it largely has to do with that there was just a lot of emotional unavailability in their childhood and upbringing, even if it was the type of emotional unavailability that kind of flew under the radar. Maybe they had a really stable and healthy home life, but there was just no real like emotional connection and checking in and talking about emotions growing up. And so this will translate into this person as an adult really shying away from deep emotional connection and anything related to emotional intimacy. And thus they can be the type of individual who becomes commitment fearing in their adult lives, or sometimes pulls away and sabotages relationships as soon as people start getting too close. Now, what we'll see is also we can have fearful avoidants who also can be slightly emotionally unavailable, but they tend to operate more in these polarities and extremes. So, this video is going to talk specifically about the dismissive avoidant attachment style and what they tend to, feel in regards to intimacy and how much connection they crave and what they fantasize about. And if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing if you want to be a part of a daily breakthrough video that I put out literally every single day on the subconscious mind, love, relationships, attachment, and communication so that we can really learn to master relationships when we didn't get a lot of this teaching often growing up. So here's the really interesting part when it comes to the dismissive avoidant, and it's that they do actually crave intimacy. They do fantasize about intimacy and closeness. They do long for romantic relationships and connection far more often than you would probably think. But here's the difference between the dismissive avoidant and, let's say, a securely attached person, for example. It's that the dismissive avoidance desires when it comes to intimacy and closeness is filtered through fear, learned helplessness, and negative beliefs about what love and intimacy is. It's almost like if you are, on a super health protocol and you're like on a diet, and it's not just any diet, it's like a diet for your health because maybe you're having blood pressure issues or a huge health concern. You might like have a longing to eat a cookie or a chocolate cake, but it's like there's all of this negativity around it and associated with it. So while it can be something that you think about, it's not something you're necessarily going to be doing or motivated to do. And so you can sort of think of that under the same like analogy or umbrella where for a dismissive avoidant, because they have so many negative beliefs about relationships at a subconscious level, and because they have a lot of learned helplessness and fear associated with deep connection and intimacy, what ends up happening is it's like they will think about relationships, they will fantasize about relationships and closeness, but they really won't take action towards it because there's so many negative blockers in the way. So I want to go through each of these major sort of components and categories. And the first one is that fear of vulnerability. We'll go through like what keeps them in learned helplessness, what their negative beliefs are, and how to really make some changes and shifts here. So the fear of vulnerability is because dismissive avoidants generally get conditioned to think that vulnerability is shameful or weak. They usually grow up in a household where it's like either it's just not supported if they are vulnerable, like there's some kind of neglect there, or if they are vulnerable, it's kind of like looked down upon. It's kind of frowned upon. It's like, oh, don't be emotional. We don't express emotions here. It may even on the flip side be rewarded if they are not emotional, right? It can go either way. It doesn't just have to be shamed or criticized. If somebody is emotional, it can be rewarded that you're always so strong, or you never show any, weakness, or and it's like, hey, you are basically getting conditioned to think that your human self and your human side is not acceptable. And it's going to cause you to actually have quite a dysfunctional kind of break in the relationship to yourself at a deeper level. And so, what essentially will end up taking place is when you go to be vulnerable or have a longing for closeness, you can't really be truly close to somebody if you're not vulnerable on some level to them. So much of how true connection happens, deep connection happens, is through vulnerability itself. And so, when that ingredient is missing, it has this massive impact on our capacity to really make relationships work long term. And so dismissive avoidants have to work through that fear of vulnerability. It doesn't mean that you have to be like so super vulnerable with every little tiny moment of your life, but it does mean that you have to be able to know what your needs are, express your needs. If somebody's affecting you in the relationship, if somebody hurt you by accident, or something that they're saying is affecting you or doing is affecting you, you have to be able to share it and open up and discuss. And it's such an important part of deepening that closeness and not feeling like a relationship is scary and so hard all the time. Now, the next part here is learned helplessness. Actually, before I go into that, I do want to let you know if you want to do a deep dive into actual communication and learning how to communicate in a vulnerable way in relationships, you can check out for free for 7 days our conflict communication course down below using the link. And it really dives into like a healthy set of steps, just this like sort of method that's very simple when it comes to breaking through communication. So learning to be vulnerable, share your needs, do it in a healthy way that's going to be received by somebody else and won't cause conflict or chaos. And it helps for like if you're dealing with somebody of a different attachment style and you're having a hard time really finding a way to connect to them and to get understood by them. And again, it's like designed to not cause conflict and eruptions, but instead approach opening up from a place of vulnerability, but also from a place of being really clear and specific. So things can't get lost in translation. So, anyways, you can check out that method. It'll give you a huge breakthrough in under an hour of going through that course. And you can check out it for free for 7 days. So the second part here is like the learned helplessness part. And dismissive avoidance, although they may crave intimacy, it tends to go into the fantasy world because it's filtered through all these fears, like I said. So they'll have this fear of vulnerability, then they'll have this learned helplessness where they believe, I can't do that. That's not for me. I don't know how other people do that in relationships. And rather than being like, oh, I haven't learned the skills because they weren't modeled to me, and that's not my fault. And I'm a human being. So, of course, I'm capable of closeness to others. Instead, dismissive avoidance like put themselves in a box in their identity. And they tend to just have these limiting beliefs like, oh, I'm not that. I can't do that. Relationships are not for me. I wasn't built for this stuff. And it really causes them to stay stuck and just kind of frozen. And I've had countless conversations with DAs in my client practice over the years who have said things like, oh, I'm just not capable of that kind of thing. And meanwhile, then I give them a couple quick tools on communication, and then they start having these huge breakthroughs. And it's like, oh, I am capable. And this whole time, for sometimes decades, people have just been believing that that's not them because it's really easy to stay in learned helplessness when we don't have education and awareness and knowledge that there are other solutions, right? It's like we don't know what we don't know. And so when we think that something's just not possible for us and we haven't had any kind of breakthrough or awareness there, then it's easy to put ourselves in a box and just say, oh, that's not us, that's not possible. But to become great at anything, we have to first understand it. And so when we can understand just a few simple things and then put them into practice, it creates these big capacities for change and transformation and deeper connection. So the other major thing that tends to happen, and it kind of goes under the same category in a sense as the learned helplessness, is that dismissive avoidants tend to have a lot of limiting beliefs about themselves besides that I am incapable. And they can believe that neglect will just be inevitable. They can believe that relationships will always end in some kind of painful event. They can have a fear of being trapped. They can be very afraid of being helpless if they rely on somebody else. And again, those limiting beliefs about being weak or shameful if I'm too vulnerable can come into play. And as long as these things are here, again, that intimacy craving will be there, that craving for closeness will be there. But wherever we can't get our needs met in the present, the mind kind of splits off into fantasy and goes there to get its needs met. And you'll see that happen a lot here. In other words, because the dismissive avoidant feels like they can't get their needs met and connection and deep closeness is unsafe, they'll tend to fantasize about closeness more than actually behave in a way that's likely to create it. And so again, in order to fix this, we have to go into the root and we have to subconsciously reprogram our fears around intimacy And by doing that and by reconditioning some of these ideas that we've been carrying for so long, that's the first step at the root level to being able to then communicate. Now, another really powerful tool for reconditioning is exposure work. It's like if you get a few simple steps to powerful communication and you just plug them in and you practice in small increments and chunks over time, eventually what does happen is the needle moves and we see those shifts even without having to work through major limiting beliefs because you're essentially reconditioning yourself to see, guess what? It's actually not that bad. And it's causing you to challenge and break it apart, those limiting beliefs that have been there for so long. When you start to see results from your behavior creating a different reaction than your limiting beliefs were expecting. By the way, if you want to do a deeper dive into attachment styles, relationships, core wounds, and needs, you can get my book, Learning Love, on Amazon right now. It provides everything you need to know about why you act the way that you do in relationships, where your core wounds come from, and how to actually move through them, and how you can find and maintain a thriving romantic connection that will bring you true happiness by becoming securely attached. All of the empowered relationships you have in your external world come from a healthy, secure relationship to yourself first. And I'll teach you how to get there. The link to Learning Love is in the description just down below. So, anyways, that's also in the conflict course if you want to take a deeper dive into it or take a look. It's great for all attachment styles and anybody who's just feeling unheard or unseen in their lives and just wants like a few simple steps to see the needle move. But I hope this makes a lot of sense here for you today. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos, please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in future videos.